Thank you everyone for attending today's Cyber Risk Series on API security. My name is Dilip Bachwani. I'm the CTO here at Qualys for our global platform and product engineering for cloud operations and customer support and success. Today we are talking about APIs and API security. So I think we are all very well aware that APIs continue to play a very pivotal role in digital transformations. They are everywhere. They help us to integrate applications and platforms together. And this integration of applications and platforms across all these different systems is what is ultimately enabling higher order value for business. Now, what that means is APIs are here to stay. In fact, as our world is getting more integrated, there will be more of them. And if you were to just look at some data that I have here for the Qualys platform, we have over 400 microservices across our platform. We have thousands of API endpoints that these services expose. And in addition to that, we have a continuous build and release process where new releases are going out all the time. Existing API endpoints are sometimes getting updated, new API endpoints are added, new services are added. And ultimately, what that results in is this notion that API sprawl is real. I mean, APIs are everywhere, and they're growing, and they will continue to grow exponentially. Now, what we are also seeing is applications and APIs are a prime target. They're a significant target for attackers. So here is some data from Verizon's 2024 data breach investigations report. And as you can see here, web applications are a significant component as a threat vector. And when you really think about it, modern web applications using microservice architectures have APIs deeply embedded in them. And that really is one of the reasons where, as we are thinking about API security at Qualys, we've kind of thought about it in a more holistic manner, where we are combining web application scanning, malware scanning, API security, to give a more unified view of how you should think about application security. So, as I was saying, when you really think about application security, right, what we have come out with now, the evolution of a web application security to TotalAppSec, what that does is it combines all your discovery for web applications for API security, passive discovery and active discovery. And then based on the data that we are collecting, we do pretty extensive security posture management and compliance management for your API specifications, and of course for your web apps. And then in addition to the posture management, obviously, we run vulnerability scans against APIs and runtime, with coverage for OWASP top 10 across web applications and APIs again, collecting all the data and then using TrueRisk, helping you prioritize that information so you can focus on what is most important to you from a risk standpoint. And that prioritization ultimately translates into reporting, and that reporting then gets pushed down to your internal operations teams, it gets pushed down to your development teams, especially because application security tends to have a significant shift left component, right? Where you have to rely on your development teams and engineering teams to actually provide the fix that you need. So this risk remediation oftentimes is driven from engineering. And the way we look at this is, how do we tie shift left behavior to the shift right behavior and have this flow where in some cases we will find issues during dev build life cycles, and in other cases we will find issues at runtime. But then how do we take this information that we find at runtime and how do we send that over to the engineering teams to address and remediate? And I'll talk a little bit more about that later in how we are specifically doing it ourselves too. So again, from a total AppSec standpoint, the intent here really is to bring web applications together, bring APIs together, bring malware detection together, do complete discovery and inventory for everything, pretty comprehensive vulnerability checks and misconfiguration checks. Of course, complete coverage for OWASP top 10 for both web applications and APIs. And then tying it all together into a more unified view of how you should think about application security. Just some data points here. Our web application product has been around for a good amount of time. And as I was mentioning earlier, we've now evolved that into TotalAppSec by building very comprehensive API security capabilities in the product. It earlier had some capabilities, but when you really think about it, when you have a web application, the web application itself is, oftentimes made up of APIs. Your UI screens are calling APIs. And so while we've done really well on web application scanning, with almost 4,500 customers, we're a leader in GitHub's report. We've got very good feedback on the product. We are now adding API security to that same foundation to be able to say, how do you run this application security, posture management and remediation more comprehensively? And in some cases where it makes sense, think about API security similarly, but also differently, where it is different, but combining all of that into a single pane of glass, and how you act on it and how do you remediate on it. So API security testing. At Qualys, the way we look at things is we obviously have a lot of security products. And the big thing that we do internally is we use every product that we have, every product that our customers use, we use that product internally for our own platforms. And that's what we call Qualys on Qualys. And we do the same thing for API security. So I will talk a little bit about what are all the different areas of API security that we focus on internally. And then, how do we do that at runtime? How do we do that at build time? And then how all of that comes together from a reporting and remediation standpoint. So obviously one of the first things is comprehensive discovery, identifying all the APIs in your environment, internal APIs, external APIs, shadow APIs, categorizing all these APIs, based on their risk, based on potential attack surface. And the reason you do that is when you have thousands and tens of thousands of APIs, you really also have to say, what am I going to focus on first, right? This whole notion of what is my real risk and what am I doing first to mitigate that risk? Compliance. When we think of API security, of course, the Open API specification is a big part there. So how do we look at API security and compliance from an Open API spec standpoint? We have a lot of detections, over 200, that we have built that are now part of our detections and findings for API security. And then prioritization and remediation, prioritizing vulnerabilities based on severity, potential impact, and exploitability. This is really the basis behind true risk, right? And utilizing true risk to say, yes, I have a vulnerability, but what asset is that vulnerability on? What is the exploitability of that vulnerability? And then what do I focus on first, right? What are the critical vulnerabilities that I should focus on first that are causing the most risk? And that is the risk that we have to think about mitigating first. Shift left, shift right. Again, a big component, especially when you think of application security. And then how do you think of combining shift left security with shift right security and having this loop of doing as much as you can during build time as part of your CI pipelines, but then even as you go into production, continually scanning in production for both vulnerabilities and misconfigurations and 0 days. And if you find something there, how do you loop that back to your engineering teams so they can take that up, they can prioritize those fixes. So we are making sure that our systems at runtime are safe and secure. And then as part of that, the vulnerability testing too, which where we have the OWASP top 10, we check for PII data, we check for other sensitive data, and have a pretty comprehensive set of detections in that space too. So when we are really thinking about API security internally at Qualys, we are looking at it more from this standpoint. How do we do complete discovery for everything? How do we do complete application security posture management? How do we then run checks and scans for complete vulnerability testing and misconfiguration testing? Because when you really think about it, ultimately, any security issue is either a vulnerability or it is a misconfiguration. And if you're looking at both of these together and you're saying, okay, what is the breadth of impact here? Then you will have the right kind of coverage. And then based on that coverage and the detections, then you can prioritize what do you want to look at? What do you want to fix first? What is highest priority to you for your business from a risk standpoint? And how do you work with your teams on remediation for all of that? So coming to the runtime part of this, the way we look at this is there is a runtime aspect, and then of course there is the build and CI aspect for all the areas that I talked about earlier. So at runtime, we are doing comprehensive API discovery, and we do that using our other Qualys products like VMDR, detecting what APIs are out there, what web applications, as an example, are out there, tapping into gateways that most organizations use on what is the API inventory on these gateways, and how do we scan all those API endpoints. And then once we have that discovery at runtime, then running our posture management checks, running our continuous compliance scanning checks and vulnerability checks across all these endpoints. And then once we have that information, this is something our SecOps teams are doing at runtime. And once we have that information, then how do we prioritize that information? What is the most important piece? And how do we take this information and then send them down to our engineering teams or other teams that need to take this up and address these gaps? Now, one other thing I would like to highlight here is We are a FedRAMP platform. We have FedRAMP moderate across FedRAMP moderate authorization across our platforms, and we are very close now to getting FedRAMP high authorization, hopefully within the next 2 to 3 months. Now, what that also means is, since our entire platform today is FedRAMP moderate, we have to stick to pretty stringent remediation SLAs for any vulnerability and misconfiguration that we find. As an example, for critical vulnerabilities, we have to address that, fix that within 15 days. Highs have to be resolved within 30 days. And we take this responsibility seriously. We are a cybersecurity company. We want to make sure that we have a platform that is very safe and very secure, because that builds confidence for our customers. And of course, complies with all the other guidelines and checks that we have to stick to. Now, one other additional piece that we do at runtime, while we are using our own product for scanning, and we generate these reports and we validate these reports continually, we also do external pen testing periodically, just so we have third-party validation on the quality of our checks and validation on the quality of our processes in how we are identifying and resolving anything that comes up across our platforms. So this is a very high level of how we are managing this at runtime for our production systems, where the scans are happening continually, we are collecting data continually, and then we are prioritizing on what we need to do. And based on the risk factor, we are saying what should we address first. But in reality, just based on our FedRAMP requirements, we actually fix everything, and stick to the SLAs that FedRAMP requires us to stick to. Now, the other aspect of this, especially from an API security standpoint, is how do you do this from a shift left perspective? How do you secure your build environments? How do you secure your CI/CD pipelines? How is your development teams and engineering teams identifying and resolving issues, ideally while they are writing code, while they are building code locally, right? And so the way we do that is we have a lot of these capabilities that I'm talking about for discovery, for misconfiguration and posture management, for vulnerability scanning, also completely integrated into our dev, build, and CI/CD pipelines. So as an example, when you think of discovery, what we do is we have internal tools and that are part of the product that you can point to a repository, and we will run a scan of that repository, and we will be able to then tell you what are all the different API endpoints that you have across your repositories. And where this is valuable is many times you will end up with a lot of shadow APIs that you were not expecting, or endpoints that you didn't think were live or being used and you didn't realize. But if you are running a complete check in your code base and you are saying, can I identify every single API endpoint across my code base? Then you have a complete comprehensive view of everything. So that's how we look at it. At the development stage, at the build stage, we are doing these kinds of scans. We are collecting all this data. And then after we are collecting this data, then we are running our checks on that data. So in our CI pipelines, as we are doing our builds and as we are spinning up our services and applications in our CI pipelines, we are then pointing to these endpoints and we are running our compliance and misconfiguration checks, our vulnerability scans, all of that to collect the data, to get the results, and in real time to send that information back to our development teams so they can address anything that comes up while they are actively doing development. And where this really adds value is if you are not doing this, from a shift left standpoint, then it is likely that you may find issues at runtime. And when you find issues for application security at runtime, it's not sometimes as simple as just patching a piece of software. In this case, you actually have to make a change to your services that are exposing these APIs, or your web apps that are, that might have a gap. So these requests then have to go to your engineering teams, and these engineering teams then have to take that up in their release cycles to make the fixes, to test the fixes, and to then get that out either as a hot fix if it is a critical issue, or maybe even in the next release cycle. But anytime you do this, you're adding a lot of cycle time to your processes. So if you are able to shift left, especially for application security, and if your development teams, as they are making code changes, as they are building new API endpoints, if they're able to find out any changes, any fixes they have to make while they are doing development, then you have faster time to market, you have more secure code going out, and you don't have to do this back and forth between your security teams and your development teams on fixing application security issues, which if you look at historically, tend to take longer times to fix. Just because it needs to go into the next release cycle, it has to be planned. And those things just invariably end up becoming challenges and slowing down the fixes, that really should be going out as soon as possible. So the way we look at this is, integrate with the IDE as much as possible, integrate very tightly in your build environments as much as possible. Make sure your CI pipelines, as you're spinning things up in your CI pipelines, as you're running your complete suite of tests in your CI pipelines, you're checking for security checks at that stage. And if you find anything, that feedback is going immediately back to the engineering teams. This is a very big component in how we look at it. And as I talk about reporting, it'll kind of bring this together on, why the way we are looking at this and the way Qualys TotalAppSec actually combines web application scanning and API security together speeds things up for engineering teams. So reporting, right? Now, this is what I was talking about. What we do is we provide a very holistic security posture. We combine web application security and API security. And the reason we do that is many times when product teams are building a new application or a new service, the folks that are building the application and the folks that are building these service endpoints tend to be the same teams and the same individuals. So when you look at this in a more combined manner, when you say, I'm going to run all my API security checks, I'm going to run all my web application checks, and for the gaps that I find, depending on the owners for these APIs and web applications, I'm going to consolidate everything that we have found and then send that to the engineering team. They can take that up and they can fix all of that in one go. Instead of separate requests coming from a web application standpoint and then others coming from an API security standpoint. So this holistic security posture just speeds up the cycle, and that makes a big difference for us. We have unified monitoring for both of these combined. The dashboards that we have in our products you can have them at the level of a security team, where you're diving real deep at a particular API level or web application level. You can abstract it one layer up, so engineering leaders can look at it at their right level of visibility and actionability. And then, of course, executive level dashboards that talk about how we are doing broadly as an organization or as a business unit. And this kind of simplified user experience, where depending on the persona you see the value, makes a difference. So as an example, in our case, Our SecOps teams are obviously looking at everything together, all the APIs, all the web applications that we have, looking at the overall security posture. But when they're sending some information down to a particular product team or an engineering team, that engineering team, has visibility into what they need to look at, what do they need to fix, how do they kick off the scan again to validate those fixes have happened, and how does that information then get back to the security teams so they can validate it, and then we track, how we are managing that risk and how quickly that risk has been mitigated. Uh, so, so, so in some sense, really bringing it together, at least the way we see it, and I'm sure our customers, that are looking at this, as both API security and scanning, the complete total AppSec view, hopefully we'll get a similar experience to what we have internally. And then risk prioritization and remediation, right? A big piece of what we do, like I said earlier, is true risk, where instead of any given vulnerability, having just its own CVSS score, we say yes, there is a vulnerability, but then let's also understand the criticality of the asset, of the web application, of that API endpoint, where that vulnerability is. What is the exploitability of that vulnerability? Is it external facing? Is it internal facing? What kind of impact could we have should this get exposed? And we then combine all of that, and then we come up with a true risk score. And that true risk score is really what is used to help you prioritize on what you should look at first. And then as we do that, we also have automated pipelines internally. So as we are finding something, let's say in our CI pipeline or even in production, once we get that information, how quickly can we route that information to the right product engineering or platform teams that need to take that up and that need to fix that. And obviously these things again make a difference, because especially with application security, otherwise there can be a significant disconnect between security operations teams and engineering teams. And if there is one big takeaway that I would have here is, as much as you can integrate these two groups, so they are working closely together, so information is being passed easily from one group to the other, and that feedback loop is maintained. That's what will help you reduce the risk for web applications and APIs. And then, of course, that will give you, pretty significant operational efficiency. And I think I can certainly say that we see that internally within our organization. So this is kind of the high level of how we are looking at it. There is obviously a runtime component of how we scan, our entire footprint in production. There is a build and CI/CD component. And then how do we bring both of these together? How do we bring APIs and web applications together? How do we look at security for these in a more unified manner, so that we are getting value faster in how we are responding to threats in this space? So Qualys TotalAppSec is live. It's something that you can look at, you can try. I of course would be very interested for folks that are already using it. I would be very interested in hearing about how you are doing application security testing and validation in your own environments. Are there any best practices that you think have really worked out for you? Right, and as we learn from you guys, which oftentimes in conversations with customers, we may have our own view of things, but anytime you talk to customers, you learn about how they are really using this in their own environments, and we take that and we fold that into our products. So feedback is always appreciated. And you can certainly start a trial if you're not already using this, and let us know what your experience with it is. So with that, I'll wrap it up here. Thank you so much, everyone.